Welcome, everyone, to the third meeting of our 4 meetings on the philosophy of Yeshayahu Leibowitz. Yeshayahu Leibowitz, Audacious Israeli Philosophy. Our first 2 talks were on Yeshayahu Leibowitz's concept of Judaism. Judaism as a religion of practical commandments, not a religion of dogmas. Our second 2 talks will be on Yeshayahu Leibowitz's concept of Zionism and the state of Israel. Today, our topic is After Kibia, the curse. Let us begin with an urgent prayer for the liberation of all our hostages suffering in the tunnels of Gaza. Today we shall discuss the Qibya operation, or the Qibya Raid. What was the Qibya operation? The Qibya operation took place in October 1953. It was the first military operation for which the young state of Israel was strongly condemned in international forums, including the United Nations. The Qibya operation was a reprisal raid, Pu'ulat Tagmul, a reprisal raid, what is called in Hebrew Pu'ulat Tagmul. It was carried out in response to many terror attacks by Arabs who entered Israel from the Jordan, from the area of the village of Kibia. On the 12th of October, 1953, Arab terrorists, then known as Fidayun, broke into the broader village of Yehud, which today is right north adjacent to Ben Gurion Airport, and murdered a mother and her 2 young children in their home. 2 days later, on the 14th of October, Major Rav Seren Ariel Sharon, later Prime Minister of the State of Israel, led a reprisal raid, a Pu'ulat Tagmul. This was the Qibya Raid. Kibia had 2,700 residents. Most of the men of the village fled when they saw the Israeli soldiers approaching. Ariel Sharon conquered the village easily. They blew up 40 houses and killed 69 residents, mostly women and children, since most of the men had fled. The Qibya Raid was widely condemned. On the 24th of November, the UN Security Council condemned the Qibya Raid, condemned Israel with the strongest possible censure. Nonetheless, the Qibya Raid was successful. Jordan cracked down on the Fidayun, and the raids stopped, or almost stopped. There was a period of quiet. The Pu'ulat Tagmul, the reprisal operation, proved itself as effective. 2 years later, in 1955, Moshe Dayan, who was then the chief of staff, the Ramatkal of the Israeli army, explained the theory behind reprisals, operations of Tagmul. Dayan said as follows: "We cannot always prevent the murder of workers in an orchard, or the murder of sleeping families in their homes. But we can set a high price for our blood, a price too high for the Arab populace, the Arab army, and the Arab government to pay. Retaliation operations, Pu'ulot Tagmul, are not for vengeance. They're not acts of vengeance, Pu'ulat Nakam. They're not revenge. We don't do Pu'ulot Nakam as revenge. It is an act of punishment, Pu'ulat Onesh. The reprisals are Onesh. And a warning, Atra'ah. A warning for what? That if that state does not control its population and does not prevent them from attacking us, the Israeli forces will cause havoc in its land." Notice that the idea of the reprisal raids is deterrence, to deter future actions, not revenge, not measure for measure, not midah keneged midah, not justice, not proportionality, but disproportionality. There was a big debate in Israel about the Kibya operation. And Yeshayahu Leibowitz took part in this debate. He published his article after Kibia in the journal, the bi-weekly Deterrence. He was one of the editors of Deterrence, and this was the journal in which he published his two celebrated essays on Maimonides as the Abrahamic man. It was a cultural and political bi-weekly. And Leibowitz, in this journal, published his analysis and his reaction, his response to the Qibya Raid. Leibowitz's response led to other responses by other authors who responded to Leibowitz, and there was a great debate on the question of the justification or non-justification of the Qibya Raid. Let's look at Leibowitz's article. How does his article begin? How does Qibya Raid begin? It begins as follows: Qibya, its causes, implications, and action itself are part of the great test, nisayon, to which we as a nation are put as a result of national liberation. This is one of the major ideas, perhaps the major idea in Leibowitz's Zionism, nisayon. We saw that nisayon, test or trial, is a major idea in his concept of Judaism. Nisayon is Abraham in the binding of Isaac. God tried, God tested Abraham, nisayon. The idea of religion as being a challenge, religion as being dat tovat, a demanding religion, is connected for Leibowitz with the idea of nisayon. To be an Abrahamic individual means to stand the test, to stand the trial, to pass a nisayon. And for him, for Leibowitz, not only is religion a nisayon, but Zionism, the return to Israel, is a nisayon. It's a test to which we as a nation are put as a result of national liberation, political independence, and our military power. For we were bearers of a culture. In the diaspora, we were bearers of a culture which for many generations derived certain spiritual benefits. Notice this, he's saying, in the diaspora, Jews have spiritual benefits. Materially, Jews are in bad shape, but they have spiritual benefits. What are the spiritual advantages of being in the diaspora? From the conditions of exile, foreign rule, and political impotence. There's something good about political impotence. Nietzsche spoke about this, that there's an advantage that the slave has by being impotent. The advantage is you have no power to do anything, good or bad, so you can't be blamed for anything. This is what Leibowitz says. In the Galut, we were impotent. We had political impotence. And what about our Jewish morality? Our morality was conditioned by an insulated existence in which we could cultivate values. We had all kinds of beautiful Jewish values, which were never tested. There was no nisayon. Were never tested in the crucible of reality. We appeared to have gained control over one of the terrible drives to which human nature is subject, the impulse to communal murder. In the diaspora, we Jews never murdered anybody. Right? We didn't attack any other nation and murder them. We appeared to have gained control over one of the most terrible drives to which human nature is subject, the impulse to communal murder. Jews did not engage in communal murder in the diaspora. We didn't pay attention to the fact that in our historical situation, such mass murder was not a means at our disposal. We didn't have the opportunity. We didn't have an army, so we couldn't commit mass murder. The diaspora, the galut, was a form of escapism. And here, Leibowitz says something very interesting. He says, why was it that many Jews from the entire spectrum of Jewish life, from the secularists, the Reform, the religious, the ultra-Orthodox, among all Jews, there was anti-Zionism. that were the anti-Zionists. Why didn't all the Jews join in Zionism? What was the ideology behind the anti-Zionists? And Leibowitz says, very simple. You have an advantage to be in the diaspora, an advantage that you have no responsibility. No one's going to put you to the test. You enjoy impotence. You enjoy powerless. So the Jews' powerlessness, the Jews were enjoying this lack of power in the diaspora. And therefore, many Jews did not want to take on the responsibility of independence. Independence means responsibility. And many Jews did not want to take on this responsibility, and therefore there were many Jews who were anti-Zionists. The Jews who became Zionists were those who wanted to take on the responsibility of establishing the Jewish state. When Leibowitz wrote this about the impotence of the Jews in the diaspora, Professor Ernst Simon, who was also participating in the debate in Deterrence, wrote Leibowitz in response that this argument, that this analysis that you have put forth is already found in Judah Halevi's Kuzari, part 1, paragraph 113, paragraphs 113 and 114 in the Kuzari. What happens in the Kuzari? In the Kuzari, the rabbi says to the king of the Khazars, he says to him, well, you see that the Christians and the Muslims are fighting and killing each other. That's all they're doing all the time. The Muslims are killing the Christians, and the Christians are killing the Muslims. They're fighting all the time. They're engaging in war all the time. And we Jews, we are humble. We're not killing anybody. We're sitting quietly. And the king says to him something like, wait till you have a state. Now, when Ernst Simon quoted this to Leibowitz, Leibowitz, of course, said, yes, you're right. That's really the same idea. And this statement by Judah Halevi has been quoted often in Zionist literature after Ernst Simon quoted it in the Kibia debate. But it should be noticed that the king was not a pacifist. The king is not saying that, watch out, Jews, when you have a state, you're going to go to war like everybody else. Because the king himself, the king of the Khazars himself, was a warrior. He himself was a military person. What he's saying is, when you have a state, you will be forced to go to war like all other states. And the test is how you will conduct yourself in the war. Will you know when to use power and when not to use power? That is the test that Judah Halevi was talking about in the Kuzari. Having power means you are being tested to know how you are going to use that power. And this was precisely Leibovitz's point here. He's saying in the diaspora, we didn't have that test. If you don't have power, then you don't have a test of how you're going to use your power. And in the diaspora, we Jews were politically impotent. We didn't have the power to murder. Let's move on to the next text. Here Leibowitz explains in this continuation of the article after Kibia, by the logic of history and moral evaluation, from a historical and ethical point of view, our war of independence was a necessary consequence of our 2,000-year exile. We were in exile for 2,000 years. It's only natural that we should return to our homeland, and therefore our war of independence was a necessary consequence of this 2,000-year exile. Only one prepared to justify historically, religiously, or morally the continuation of our exilic existence could refuse to take upon himself the moral responsibility for using the sword to restore freedom. Right? In order to establish our state, we were forced to use the sword. And only those who would prefer to remain in diaspora, who would prefer the political impotence of the diaspora, only they can say, we're not going to pick up the sword. But anyone who recognizes the necessity of the return of the Jewish nation to the land of Israel recognizes that it was necessary to take up the sword to restore freedom. Therefore, in our religious moral stock-taking, we do not apologize for the bloodshed in the war itself. Bloodshed in the war is necessary. You go to war, the war is necessary, it's a just war, and blood will be shed. The problem concerns the manner of conducting that war. That's the question that Leibowitz is saying. Yes, we have to fight. Yes, it was necessary for our independence and our liberation to fight, but the problem before us is how to use the power, the manner of the fighting, the manner of the conducting of the war. The problem concerns the manner of conducting that war, which goes on to this very day. Right? He's writing here in 1953. Independence was 1948. It is a difficult problem once the craft of Esau, right? Umanuto shel Esav, the craft, which is war. Once the craft of Esau has been granted to Jacob, once Jacob takes up the craft of Esau, once the craft of Esau has been granted legitimacy, the distinction between the permissible and the forbidden is very subtle. But that is our challenge, to know when to use the power, when not to use the power. And this is the nisayon, which we see in Kibia and we see in all conflicts between Israel and our enemies. Let's move on to the next text. We can indeed justify the action of Kibia before the world. It's possible to justify the Kibia operation. This was what the whole debate was about. Can we justify the action of Kibia or not? Is it possible to justify it? We can indeed justify the action of Kibia before the world. Its spokesmen and leaders admonish us for having adopted the method of reprisal, pu'ulot tagmul, right? We're criticized for using tagmul. What is tagmul? It's cruel mass punishment of innocent people for the crimes of others in order to prevent their recurrence. That's what's called the deterrence theory of punishment. In the deterrence theory of punishment, you punish not in order to achieve justice, not in order to achieve revenge, but in order to prevent future crimes. That's the deterrence theory of punishment. And indeed, pu'ulot tagmul it's part of the deterrence theory of punishment. We could argue that we have not behaved differently than did the Americans in deploying the atomic bomb. America saw herself in the fourth year of a war she had not initiated, and after the loss of 250,000 of her sons, facing the prospect of continued war for an unforeseeable period of time, this fear led to the atrocity of Hiroshima, where 100,000 civilians, mostly women and children, were killed in one day to bring about the quick termination of this nightmare. Is it justified or not justified? We too are now in the sixth year of a war that was forced upon us and has become a nightmare. And the border settlers and those responsible for their security, right, the Israeli Defense Forces, reciprocated with cruel slaughter and destruction. Okay, so we have an explanation. We can explain what happened at Kibia. Just as the Americans dropped the bomb on Hiroshima in order to stop the war, so we are taking this measure of deterrence in order to stop the attacks of the Arabs against us. Let's move on to the next. It is possible to justify this action, but let us not try to do so. Well, why not? If it's possible to justify it, why not justify it? And here we are seeing that Leibowitz is going to distinguish between what might be said to be two types of morality or two types of ethics, or what Leibowitz calls ethics and curse. It is possible to justify this action, but let us not try to do so. There is an instructive precedent for the Qibya story of Shechem, in the biblical story of Shechem and Dinah. Right? In Genesis, in Genesis chapter 34, there is a story which is similar to the Kibya story. Leibowitz says, and we can learn from it. What is the story? The story is the story of Shechem and the story of Shechem and Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. The sons of Jacob did not act as they did out of pure wickedness. What happens in Genesis 34? Shechem, the son of Hamor, the neighbors of Jacob and his family, Shechem decides that he wants to marry Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. So he takes Dinah, abducts Dinah, and then he says to Jacob, we want to marry your daughters. I want to marry your daughter Dinah, and our people will marry your daughters. We'll all join together and make peace. The sons of Jacob agreed to this deal, and then they said, but before you can marry our daughter, you have to be circumcised, because we're all circumcised. So the people of Shechem, the whole city of Shechem, circumcised themselves. And while they were ailing after their circumcision, Shimon and Levi and the sons of Jacob attacked the city of Shechem and killed all the males who were weak because of the circumcision. Well, they had a decisive justification for what they did, Leibowitz said. They had a moral justification. Should one deal with our sister as with a harlot? Hachazona ya'aseh et achotenu. That was the argument. It was a pu'ulat tagmul. That's what it was. The Shechem had abducted Dinah. Should one deal with our sister as with a harlot? In punishment and in deterrence, the sons of Jacob attacked the city and killed all the males. So there was a justification. The Torah adds to its description of the atrocity 3 words in the Hebrew, 3 words which apparently convey the moral judgment of the deed. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. Asher timu et achotam. It seems like the biblical author is here justifying the deed. They defiled their sister, therefore there was a pu'ulat tagmul. Therefore there was a reprisal raid, and the sons of Jacob killed the sons of Shechem. Nevertheless, because of this action, 2 tribes in Israel, Shimon and Levi, were cursed by Jacob for generations. They were cursed by their father Jacob, who is Israel. Shimon and Levi, weapons of violence, their kinship. Shimon v'Levi, klei Hamas mecherotehem. Cursed be their anger, I will scatter them. There may be an action, Leibowitz says, which is explained, morally explained, reasoned, given ethical reasons, and even justified in the moral evaluation, mutzdak, but nevertheless accursed. So what happened here? What do we see in this event of the story of Dinah? That Leibowitz says the sons of Jacob had moral justification. Their sister had been abducted. Hachazona ya'aseh et achotenu. Will they make our sister a harlot? Their sister had been abducted. And therefore, there was a justification of the pu'ulat tagmul, of the reprisal raid. Nonetheless, even though it was justified, Jacob cursed them. Jacob cursed his sons, cursed Shimon and Levi. Shimon v'Levi klei Hamas macherotehem. Shimon and Levi, weapons of violence, their kinship, cursed be their anger, I will scatter them. So here we have an act, Leibowitz says, which is morally justified, mutzdak, but cursed. And he said, this is the same thing as Kibia. It's morally mutzdak. Yes, they attacked the 3 Jews in Yehud. They killed the mother and her 2 little children. It was morally justified to have a reprisal raid in order to prevent these attacks by the Arab terrorists on the border towns. Nonetheless, this act in which 69 innocent Arabs were killed is cursed. The Qibya Raid was justified but cursed. That's what Leibowitz argued. After Leibowitz wrote this, there was a big argument. Look, it's either moral or it's not moral. How can you say it's justified but it's cursed? If you think it's justified, then it's justified. If it's not justified, it's not justified. How can you say that it's justified but it's cursed? I think we can understand Leibowitz's distinction between ethical and cursed if we see the debate going on in Israel today with regard to the Gaza war. For example, the Prime Minister said in an official statement that we've killed 25,000 terrorists out of 50,000 people that have been killed. So we killed 25,000 terrorists, and we've killed 50,000 citizens of Gaza. And we, of course, are committed to the complete destruction of Hamas. Now, according to those who deal with the ethics of war, a 1-to-1 ratio in war today is considered moral. So if you kill 25,000 terrorists, you are allowed, within the framework of morality, to kill 25,000 civilians, 1-to-1. For every terrorist that you kill, there's collateral damage of 1 civilian. And this 1-to-1 ratio is said by the experts in the ethics of war today to be justified morally. If you have a war and you kill 50,000 people in order to kill 25,000 terrorists, you kill 25,000 combatants in order to kill 25, and while you're at it, by collateral damage, you kill 25,000 non-combatants, civilians, that is considered morally justified. And the question is, yes, it's morally justified, but still, killing 25,000 innocent civilians is some kind of a problem. If you say it's not a moral problem, what kind of a problem is it? It's not a moral problem because those who deal with the ethics of war say, if you have to kill 25,000 terrorists, you're allowed to kill 25,000 non-combatants as collateral damage, 1-to-1. But if it's not moral, if it's not a moral problem, what kind of a problem is it? And Leibowitz says, well, you have a moral justification, but it's cursed. It's an accursed act. And that's Leibowitz's controversial distinction between moral and cursed. Yes, you have a moral justification, but no, don't do it. Should one deal with they had the moral justification, should we deal with our sister as a harlot? And the Torah adds its description of the atrocity, 3 words in the Hebrew text, asher timu et achotenu, they defiled our sister. They have a justification. Nevertheless, they were cursed by Jacob, Shimon v'Levi, klei Hamas macherotehem. There is a Jewish aspect to the Kibia incident. What is the Jewish aspect to the Kibia incident? Is there a Jewish aspect to it? So far, Leibowitz has been speaking about morality. Even when he quotes the story of Jacob from the book of Genesis, he's speaking universally. This holds for everybody, right? It's not a particularly Jewish problem. This is true for all armies that have a reprisal raid, it's not necessarily a particularly Jewish or Zionist problem. However, there is a Jewish aspect to the Qibya incident. From where have these youths come who felt no inhibition to perform the atrocity when given the occasion of retaliation? Right? Who are these soldiers? Where did they come from? When they killed 69 women and children inside their homes, they blew up these homes. What were they thinking? What was their education? They were nurtured on the values of a Zionist education. These are our youth who were brought up here in the land of Israel, and we educated them on our Zionist education. Their conduct is among the consequences of applying the religious category of holiness, kedusha, to social, national, and political interests. This is a major theme of Leibowitz. We saw that when he speaks in terms of the notion of holiness in the Jewish religion, when he's speaking of the absolute, the notion of holiness is totalitarian. Holiness is the word of God. When God is alone, the Holy One, blessed be He. God's commandments are alone holy. The only thing that is holy are the mitzvot ma'asiyot, the commandments of God. And what we see in our Zionist education is a secularization of the notion of holiness. The values, the national values are held to be holy. The national values are held to be sacred. And since they're held to be sacred, there's no criticism of them. And Leibowitz says there has to be criticism of everything except the word of God. There has to be criticism of everything except the mitzvot ma'asiyot. And the mitzvot ma'asiyot, which deal only with actions commanded by God, free the Jew to be critical of everything else. Remember, that's what we saw when he said that the one value that the Abrahamic individual has is the service of God. Everything else is open to question. Everything else is open to criticism. The moment you take the value of the sacred and you apply it to the values of the state, then you prevent criticism of the actions of the state. You turn the state into the same kind of absolute demand as the demand of the Torah and the mitzvot. These soldiers, and Leibowitz has been complaining all the time that this is inside the Zionist education, that the secular Zionist education has taken the religious notion of holiness and secularized it. It's called chilun. They've turned it into secular notions, that obligation to the state, duty to the state becomes holy. Once duty to the state is holy, you can't criticize it. You can't question it. They were nurtured on the values of a Zionist education. Their conduct is among the consequences of applying the religious category of holiness which should be applied only to the mitzvot, only to the commandments. When this category of holiness is applied to social, national, and political interests, this is what happens. The concept of holiness, which is absolute and beyond all categories of human thought and evaluation, is transferred to the profane. From a religious standpoint, only God is holy. God is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only God is holy. And only His imperative, namely the mitzvot ma'asiyot, only His imperative is absolute. All human values are profane. Country, state, and nation. They are never holy. They are always subject to criticism. We may find ourselves, he says, erecting our third commonwealth upon the curse of Jacob our father. Even though everything we do is justified, even though everything we do is moral, even though everything we do is ethical, still, Shimon v'Levi klei chamas macheroteihem. It's the curse of Jacob our father, that you can have an act which is purely ethical and at the same time be cursed. Now, the argument here is a religious argument in that he's saying that the notion of holiness should only be used with regard to God and God's commandments, with regard to Hashem v'mitzvot hamasiyot. There's also a political aspect, namely, once you say that the values of the state become sacred, then there's no criticism. And we see today that what has been called, there's been a large debate about the most popular song in Israel today. What is the most popular song in Israel? There's a song which everybody, all Jews, both in Israel and in the diaspora, Jews, young Jews sing it in kindergarten and in nursery school and in the universities and on the streets and in music halls in the diaspora and in Israel. It's been called the new national anthem of Israel. The song is Tamid ohevoti, that God always loves me, right? Hashem yitbarach tamid ohevoti, v'tamid yihiyeh li rak tov. God, may he be blessed, always loves me, and I always have only good things happen to me. V'od yoter tov, better things happen to me. V'od yoter tov, still better things. V'od yoter tov, and even better things. Everything is good. This is similar to the theory of the Christian philosopher Leibowitz, who said that this is the best of all possible worlds. And God is the best of all possible gods, who created for us the best of all possible worlds. This is supposed to be the concept of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, but in fact, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov did not say anything like this. But whatever this statement is, everybody loves it, everybody sings it, and it is the most anti-Leibowitzian type song one can imagine. Why is it anti-Leibowitzian? Because first, it's a clear example of dat manika, not dat tovat, an example of endowing religion, a religion that gives to the individual, not a dat tovat, a religion which demands from the individual. Hashem yitbarach tamid ohevoti, v'tamid yeh li rak tov. God is giving to me, he's endowing me. It's not speaking about my service of God, but God's service of me. And we remember how Leibowitz criticized the translator of his article on Abraham and Maimonides. Remember, the translator took the verse of Isaiah, which spoke about Abraham Ohavi, Abraham who loves me. And the translator translated it as Abraham my beloved. And Leibowitz said, this is a grievous translating mistake, because Isaiah doesn't say that God loves Abraham. Isaiah says that Abraham is the lover of God. Abraham is the servant of God. God is not the servant of Abraham. Now, this song, which is Hashem yitbarach tamid ohevoti, God loves me, doesn't say I love God. God loves me. But tamid yeh li tov, and therefore it will always be good for me. Od yoter tov, od yoter tov, od yoter tov. And I think it's hard to imagine a more anti-Leibowitzian song, and it's hard to imagine what Leibowitz would say if he were alive today and heard this song. But the song illustrates the idea of not criticizing at a time when the nation is in difficult straits, and we have our hostages suffering in the tunnels of Gaza. We have our soldiers being killed on the battlefield, and we have great difficulties in achieving our goals of defeating the terrorists at this terrible time, when time of the wake of the Hamas massacres of Simchat Torah last year, how is it possible to say, Od yoter tov, we want it even better, we want it even better? I think what is problematic from the Leibowitz point of view is if you think in this way, then you're not going to try to criticize, you're not going to try to find a way to solve the problems. Let's move on to the next text. The greatest critic of Yeshayahu Leibowitz in his interpretation of the Qibya Raid was his sister, Nechama Leibowitz. Nechama Leibowitz, his younger sister, the great Bible commentator. Nechama Leibowitz was professor of Bible at the Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University. She, like Leibowitz, like Yeshayahu Leibowitz, was a teacher who would teach in all kinds of situations. She would teach in any youth group, in any group that invited her. Perhaps the greatest Bible teacher in Israel in the 20th in Israeli society. And Nechama Leibowitz carried on a debate with her brother on many subjects. Her approach was completely different from the approach of Yeshayahu Leibowitz. Yeshayahu Leibowitz's approach to everything was theological and political. Right? Theological and political. He always asked about Avodat Hashem and what is the political ramifications. Right? His writings are, we see his interpretations of the text are theological and political, whereas Nechama Leibowitz's interpretations are educational and ethical. She's basically educational and ethical. She's looking at the text from a pedagogical point of view and from an ethical point of view, which is very often similar to the ethics of Kant. In effect, we see in the Qibya Raid, in the discussion of the Qibya Raid, in Yeshayahu Leibowitz's argument, a conflict between two kinds of ethics. There's the kind of ethics which is associated with Immanuel Kant, and that's called deontological ethics. That's an ethics that doesn't change in terms of the situation. What is right, and it doesn't matter what the circumstances. What is one's ethical duty is one's ethical duty, and there is no excuses of, but the situation is like that, or the situation is like that. So Kant had this very, very strong, clear idea of ethical duty. One has to perform one's ethical obligations, and the historical situation or the context doesn't matter. What is ethically right is always ethically right. On the other hand, there's another kind of ethics, which is a utilitarian ethics. And that's the kind of ethics that the Pu'ulot Tagmul, the reprisal raids, are part of. Deterrence. If you think in terms of deterrence, then you're not saying that punishment is always the same for everybody. But you're saying it depends what the situation is. Punishment is more severe if the crime has to be deterred, and it's less severe if the crime doesn't have to be deterred. If you're living in a society where all the drivers are very polite and there are no accidents, and the police happen to see somebody driving a few miles over the speed limit, the police may not even bother to worry about it because it's not a social problem. However, that same policeman who sees that same person driving 10 kilometers over the speed limit in another city or in another state where there are a great amount of people killed on the road in accidents, will arrest that person and give that person a large fine. In terms of punishment, in deterrence theory, you always have to take in consideration what are the societal implications. That's utilitarian ethics. In terms of Kantian deontological ethics, one doesn't take that into consideration. If there's a punishment for driving 10 kilometers over the speed limit. That has to be no matter where you are and what the situation is. You don't take into consideration the context. Nechama Leibowitz had this Kantian idea that what is right, what is ethical. And she didn't like Yeshayahu's distinction between it's justified ethically, but it's cursed. She didn't like that. And here's what she writes. She writes, in Genesis 34, by the way, she wrote this in her Gilyonot. Her Gilyonot, she used to, every Shabbat, she would prepare these pages with question sheets about the Parsha of the Shavua, about the reading of the Shavua. Every week she would, and hundreds of people would answer these sheets and send it in to Nechama Leibowitz, and she would correct them and give answers. These were very famous, these Gilyonot. Later on, she put her ideas in a series of books called Iyunim. But this statement first, her first response to Yeshayahu was in the Gilyonot in the year 1956. In Genesis 34, it is told of the murder of an entire city, men, women, and children. It's very interesting that in the biblical story, it only says Kol Zachar, they killed all the males. But in Kibia, they killed men, women, and children. Is there justification, hatzdaka, for this deed? Can we justify the deed of the children of Jacob? Asks Nechama Leibowitz. Might there be a justification in the fact that it was an act of reprisal, pu'ulat tagmul? Here, Nechama Leibowitz, in analyzing the book of Genesis, chapter 34, uses the expression pu'ulat tagmul, a reprisal operation. Now, of course, that expression is not found in the Bible. It's a modern Israeli expression. But she purposely uses this expression in order to connect her interpretation with the Qibya operation. Might there be justification in the fact that it was an act of reprisal, a pu'ulat tagmul, for the heinous crime, as the brothers said, should one deal with our sister as a harlot, hachazona ya'aseh et achotenu? Maybe there is justification for the acts of the sons of Jacob because it was a reprisal raid, a pu'ulat tagmul, from our fear, nor from the fear of the sword that fell upon the nations, we cannot learn anything regarding the righteousness of the act. The Bible also says, right, in the continuation of the text in the book of Genesis, that the terror of God was upon the cities, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. Vayehi chitat Elohim al ha'arim v'lo radfu acharei bnei Yaakov. This is exactly like in Kibia. The Qibya Raid was successful. After the Qibya Raid, there was a cessation of the terrorist attacks on the border. Similarly, the operation, the pu'ulat tagmul, the reprisal operation of the sons of Jacob was successful. The terror of God was upon the cities, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. It was successful. And here Nechama Leibowitz says, yes, it was successful. But can we think that God approved of it? Can we think that God approved of it just because it was successful? And she concludes by saying, for among the many names of the Holy One, blessed be He, right? God has many, many names. There is not found the name success. Yeshayahu Leibowitz had many, many critics, but the critic who understood him the best and gave him the best arguments and argued with him all his life was his sister, Nechama. Thank you.